Hi guys, it's Jamie here, and in this Art Tribe tutorial I'd like to combine the weekly colour challenge with the idea of Zern's mark making but in a more formal manner, because I wanted to use some materials and items that I've bought from tips left by supporters in the Ko-fi tip jar. On your screen you can see the colour palette that we're working with, and also some of the mini canvases that I bought. Thanks to Harella, Christiana, Liz, Georgia, Roseanne and Michelle. I will point out further items that I use later on in the video that were also purchased using tips from those supporters. While leaving a tip in the tip jar is not obligatory and totally voluntary, it does go towards materials either for the junk journal aspect of this channel or the art tutorials. For those interested in financially supporting the tutorials and work that goes into this channel, the tip jar link is in the description below. Don't forget you do have the opportunity, if you leave a tip, to leave a comment, and I'm more than happy if that comment includes a business name or a social media platform that you use that you would like me to mention in a video. Also in the description you'll find a link to the Etsy shop, which is called Junk Journal Cafe. And just a quick reminder that a free way to support this channel is to like and comment on the videos, because that way YouTube sees the activity and pushes the video out to new potential viewers. To do this small action takes only a moment of your time, and I'm always grateful and reply to all comments. Now let's get on with what I'm actually doing. So here you can see I have a box of scraps to my left that are called Base. They're a variety of beige and cream coloured paper pieces. I try to have a variety in the box, for example, coffee stained papers and doilies, old bits of music score, pages from old books, even newspaper articles. What I'm looking for is different weights and textures within the papers, but within that beige cream colourway. I use these in art to create a base for two reasons. One is the textures and the layering it will give me, and the other is I find it much easier to create if there is some colour on my canvas or page. I find staring at a white piece of paper or canvas quite daunting. For some reason, mentally, once there's some covering on it, I find it much easier to start throwing some paint or whatever art medium I'm using at the canvas. It is also an opportunity to actually protect the canvas, because I'm using matte medium to add my pieces, and I go over the top of those pieces with the matte medium, creating a protective layer, which helps stop the canvas or papers totally absorbing any paint colours that I add. Because I'm using these 5x5 box canvases, I'm actually wrapping my papers around the edges of the canvas as well, because when you put that on the wall you can see the canvas edges. There is no need to frame this style of canvas. I cover 6 of these 5x5 canvases. I actually end up with 5 that I'm happy with, which for me is not a bad result, 5 out of 6. The canvas that I'm not happy with can be sanded back and recovered and reused in another tutorial. Here you can see my 6 mini canvases totally covered with those beige base papers. Next, I'm taking some white gesso on a large brush, going over the edges that you can see as I previously described with the white gesso, and then slapping it around so that you get a very rough covering to that canvas. I do want some translucency there so that the underneath layers do show through a little bit. This is therefore stage 2. covering the 6 canvases with a rough layer of white gesso. From the Ko-fi tip jar, I purchased this large stencil which has quite an abstract pattern on it. I want to use parts of that pattern and this Memento London Fog Grey ink as part of the muted background for the painting. Grey is one of the colours in that colour palette challenge that you saw at the beginning of the video. This application brush is also new, so I'm loading it up quite heavily with the ink. I'm not really going to put much thought into the placement and what parts of this stencil I'm going to use. I want to free flow this. I want, when people look closely at these mini canvases, for them to see the different layers and the different aspects that have gone into them. Box canvases are slightly bouncy, therefore while I'm holding this stencil I'm trying to hold it as tightly as possible to that surface to get less movement and drag of that ink where I don't want it to go. I have never used a permanent ink through a stencil on a white base canvas before, therefore I want to check how that looks before I repeat the process on the other 5 canvases. While in a way I wish the result had been stronger, I'm okay with it for now, so I continue the process on the remaining canvases. While this isn't like Zern's mark making in the sense that she used everyday household objects, I'm hoping to still get some randomness into this background. Because inks are dry and therefore there is no wait time, I'm able to move on to using this large flower stencil, which I also purchased using those Ko-fi tips. My intention is to use part of one of the flowers per canvas and my VersaFine black ink, which is a permanent ink. I find VersaFine very juicy, so I'm expecting this time to get a stronger result on that stenciling. I know that I don't always want whole flowers on the canvas. I want them looking like they're coming off the sides or floating mid-canvas. I do want to position my flowers in different parts of the canvas because it's a series, so that when you look canvas to canvas, if they were in a row, you would see different flowers in different places on each canvas, but the unifying factor would be the colours, the background, and the use of a floral template. To try and make the stenciling stronger, I'm being incredibly careful with the application and really going over those stencil gaps with the ink loaded brush. I'm still trying to hold that stencil very carefully against the canvas so I don't get smudging. I'm actually really pleased with the crispness of that flower, so I continue this process on the other canvases. Next, I want to add some more bright white areas because that is on the colour palette challenge. And I don't want my flowers to be too perfect. This also gives me an opportunity, because I'm using the palette knife, to add more texture into the paintings. With this first canvas, I do go slightly wrong and add too much, and it does take away from the crispness and clearness of the flower. I learned from this mistake, and with the remaining canvases, whilst I still thickly add white gesso and go slightly over the borders of the ink and try to keep it random, I do have less areas of white being added, as you can see clearly on this rose stenciled canvas. Now everything has dried properly, I'm adding small amounts of scribbly script using a stencil and the black ink again. I've chosen to add some clearer script in the sense that it will stand out more, so that again the eye is drawn into that layered background under the translucent gesso, and you can see the different papers that were originally used back at stage 1. You'll notice that I'm overlapping the script with some of the flower detail. And as with the flowers themselves, the script is going onto different parts of the canvas, depending on the canvas being used, so that each canvas, if lined up together, flows in unity but has different placements on it. Moving on to adding more of the colour with the Colour Palette Challenge, I'm using acrylics and we'll be adding enough water to make them slightly more like watercolour consistency. I want the paint to be able to run. Here is the final purchase from my Kofi tip jar, this large Chinese calligraphy style brush. It means that I cannot be too delicate or detailed with applying this wash of grey. I am not covering the whole canvas with grey, I am leaving some white areas. Now that the grey has dried, I'm mixing the bright orange with a bit of white to tone it down a bit. I'm trying to match the Colour Challenge colours as best I can with the orange, because I want you to be able to see the grey underneath it, and I want it to run and pick up the ridges and the textures that have been added to this canvas. I add water and help the paint run over some limited areas of the canvas. Everything I do when it comes to art is just playing, so all of this is really an experiment that I'm just repeating across 6 small canvases rather than just on one piece. You can see that I use the brush to help direct where that orange is going to go, but trying to keep everything loose and flowing still. As this shade of orange starts to dry, I decide I want splodges of punchy colour. So I take it back to its original colour without the white mixed in and just add a few drops of that bright orange. The final shade in the colour palette was this light apricot. Therefore, I'm going to add a bit of that into this orangey grey background. As with all the paints, I'm trying to keep the strokes and the placement quite light and quite flowing and random. Where I feel I may have added too much, I just lift a little bit using some tissue. Having made what I consider a mistake when I was adding the white gesso with the palette knife by going over the flower stencil too heavily, I'm aware that I don't want to make the same mistake with the colours. I want some colour within the flower stencil, but not to cover up too much of the crisp outlines. This is basically where I leave the canvases. I let them dry. I do consider playing on, resist for once, and all that needs to be done to completely finish them is for me to add a sealant, probably a shiny one to give it a glossy tone. Unfortunately, I've run out of my favourite Crafter's Companion Spray and Shine and don't really have the money in the bank to replace it just yet. Anyway, let's take a close-up look at the final result without that spray and shine finish. I think from these close-up photos you can see the different layers and additions that have gone into this little series. I do hope you enjoyed this short tutorial, and I will see you next time.